The blade caught the chandelier light for exactly half a heartbeat before it arced toward the stable attendant's throat. Naomi Carter didn't think. Thinking would have meant staying frozen behind her serving tray. Thinking would have meant watching a man die 3 feet in front of her, while 500 people in evening gowns pretended not to notice. So Naomi didn't think. She moved. Her body collided with pressed uniform fabric and solid muscle as she threw herself between the knife and the quiet man everyone had ignored all night. The blade, that was meant to silence a witness instead, tore into Naomi's side, ripping through flesh in a line of white-hot agony that turned her vision into exploding stars. She heard screaming, maybe hers, maybe the chaos erupting as bodyguards materialized from the shadows and crystal glasses shattered against marble. Naomi hit the floor hard, her head cracking against polished stone. Blood bloomed across her white uniform, spreading like wine from a dropped bottle. Above her, the elderly Korean matriarch she'd been serving all evening stared down with eyes sharp as obsidian, shock written across her carefully composed face for what might have been the first time in decades. The pain was everything. It swallowed Naomi whole, dragging her down into a place where the Grand Lotte Hotel's ornate ballroom blurred into abstract shapes of gold and crystal. She tried to speak, to apologize for the mess she was making on their expensive floor, but her tongue felt thick and useless. Then there were hands on her face. Small, wrinkled hands that smelled of jasmine perfume and something medicinal. The old woman had dropped to her knees beside Naomi, one hand pressing against the wound with surprising strength. Naomi heard shouting in Korean, footsteps thundering. More screams that made her flinch even through the shock. And then a voice cut through everything else, sharp, commanding, and absolutely lethal. The man who strode through the ballroom entrance moved like violence given human form. Chairman Kang Jun-hyuk was tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that strained against his black suit and eyes that swept the room with the cold efficiency of someone trained to assess threats in milliseconds. He crossed the distance in 4 strides and dropped to his knees beside them, his presence making the air itself feel heavier. Up close, Naomi could see the sharp angles of his face, the scar that cut through his jaw, the way his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went white. "Who ordered this?" His voice was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded executions. His mother spoke rapidly in Korean, one hand still cradling Naomi's head, while the other pressed against her wound. The old woman's rings were covered in blood now. Naomi's blood. The absurdity of it made her want to laugh, but what came out was a choked sob. Kang Jun-hyuk's eyes finally landed on Naomi's face. For a moment, something flickered in those dark eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find bleeding on his mother's ballroom floor. A black woman in a server's uniform who'd just disrupted an execution. "Who are you?" he asked in perfect English. Naomi tried to answer, tried to explain that she was nobody, just a waitress who needed this job, who needed the tips from working parties where rich people came to have conversations they didn't want the world to hear. But her mouth wouldn't cooperate. "I'm sorry about the mess," she slurred. "I'll clean it. Please don't fire me." If you've ever made a split-second decision that changed everything, you know that moment of pure instinct. What would you do if you had to choose between staying safe and doing what's right? Keep reading, because what happens next will change Naomi's life forever. Kang said something sharp in Korean to his men. 2 bodyguards immediately moved to lift Naomi, but he stopped them with a single gesture. Instead, he holstered whatever weapon he'd been holding and slid his arms beneath her himself, one under her knees one supporting her back with careful awareness of her wounded side. The world tilted as he lifted her. Naomi's head lolled against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat through the expensive fabric of his suit. It was racing. This man, who looked like he'd been carved from stone and trained to feel nothing, was terrified. "Stay with me," he commanded, and Naomi wasn't sure if he was talking to her or his mother or the entire room. "No one else dies tonight." The last thing Naomi saw before consciousness slipped away was the matriarch's face hovering above her, the old woman's lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a threat. Then there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of sirens that would never be allowed to arrive. When Naomi's eyes cracked open again, she knew immediately she wasn't in a hospital. Hospitals didn't have 20-foot ceilings with hand-painted murals. They didn't have walls covered in silk panels or windows that stretched floor to ceiling, offering a view of Seoul's glittering skyline that must have cost more than Naomi would earn in 10 lifetimes. She was in a bed that felt like sleeping on clouds. The sheets were crisp and cool against her skin, and for a confused moment, she wondered if she'd died, and this was some kind of luxury afterlife. But then the pain registered, a deep, throbbing ache that radiated from her ribs through her entire torso, and she knew she was very much alive. A man sat in a chair across the room, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He wasn't looking at her. His attention was fixed on the city below, his profile sharp and contemplative in the ambient light. But Naomi knew he was aware of her. She could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "You're awake." Kang Jun-hyuk didn't turn from the window. "Good. My mother was getting worried." Naomi tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her side, stealing her breath. Strong hands were suddenly there, steadying her, and she realized Kang had moved across the room faster than should have been possible. "Don't move," he said, and it wasn't a suggestion. He adjusted the pillows behind her with surprising gentleness, then stepped back, maintaining careful distance. "The doctor said you need to stay still for at least 72 hours. The knife went deep. Another inch, and it would have punctured your lung." The clinical way he delivered that information sent ice down Naomi's spine. This was a man who understood violence intimately, who could probably recite the exact angle and pressure needed to kill someone with a blade. "Where am I?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Safe." He finally turned to look at her fully, and Naomi felt the full weight of his gaze. His eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to pull the sheets up higher. "You're in my home. My private doctor treated you. No hospitals, no police reports." Panic fluttered in Naomi's chest. "I need to go to work." "My shift. They'll fire me if I don't show up." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Kang's face. "You threw yourself in front of a knife and you're worried about a waitressing job." "I need that job." Desperation made her voice crack. "I send money home to my family. They're counting on me. I can't afford to lose it. I can't afford any of this." She gestured at the opulent room, at the bandages she could feel wrapped around her torso. "I don't have insurance. I can't pay for a private doctor. I can't." "Stop." The single word cut through her rising panic. Kang moved closer, not quite sitting on the bed, but close enough that she could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the barely controlled tension in his jaw. "You saved a man's life," he said quietly. "A man you didn't know. A man no one was supposed to notice." His gaze held hers. Money is not your concern anymore. Naomi stared at him, trying to process words that made no sense in the context of her life. I don't understand. You will. Kang stood, moving back toward the window. My mother wants to meet with you when you're strong enough. Until then, rest. Eat. Heal. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. And understand this, Miss Carter. The moment you moved, you stopped being invisible. You can't go back to being a waitress. That life ended the second you chose to act. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Naomi alone with the view of a city she suddenly didn't recognize and a future she hadn't asked for. Hello, my friends. Thanks for joining me on this fascinating story. Before we continue, please kindly help subscribe to the channel. Like the video and comment where you are watching from and what time it's at your end. Now let's continue with our story. There are moments in life when your body moves before your brain catches up. When instinct overrides self-preservation and you do something that changes everything. For Naomi Carter, that moment came at exactly 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night, when she saw a knife glinting in chandelier light and a man who was about to die. She didn't think about her student loans or her family's rent, or the fact that she'd just spilled champagne on marble that cost more than her car. She didn't think about the 500 powerful people who would witness what came next. She just moved. And in that half-second of pure instinct, Naomi Carter went from invisible to unforgettable, from a waitress serving drinks to a woman who would rewrite the rules of an entire criminal empire. Let me tell you about the worst decision Naomi Carter ever made, the one that saved her life by destroying it completely. It started with a knife. It always does in stories like this, doesn't it? But this wasn't some back alley mugging or a random act of violence. This was calculated, professional, an execution disguised as a party mishap. And Naomi? She got in the way. Not because she was brave, not because she understood what was really happening in that glittering ballroom full of Seoul's most dangerous people, but because when she saw that blade moving toward a man's throat, her body made a choice her brain would spend the next several months questioning. She moved. And everything, absolutely everything, changed. But to understand how a woman who'd spent her life trying to stay unnoticed ended up in the crosshairs of the Korean underworld, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to the champagne flute slipping from her fingers and the scream that tore through the Grand Lotta Hotel ballroom. Back to the moment Naomi Carter woke up and realized she'd made a terrible mistake. The silence was wrong. That was Naomi's first coherent thought when consciousness dragged her back to the surface. Not the pain, though that came roaring back a heartbeat later, but the absence of sound. No beeping monitors, no squeaking shoes on linoleum, no intercom announcements echoing down sterile hallways. Too quiet, too still. Her eyes fluttered open to darkness cut by ambient city light, filtering through what looked like floor-to-ceiling windows. She tried to move and gasped as fire ripped through her side, the pain so sharp and immediate it brought tears to her eyes. Slowly, Naomi's head snapped toward the voice. Another mistake. The room spun sickeningly. Kang Jun-hyuk sat in a chair near the window, perfectly still, like he'd been watching her sleep for hours. In the half-light, he looked carved from shadow, only his eyes catching the glow from outside. Where? Her throat felt like sandpaper. Where's my phone? You don't have one anymore. The matter-of-fact delivery made her stomach drop. My manager. I need to call. You no longer work at the Grand Lotta. Panic spiked through the medication haze. You can't just... I already did. He stood, moving with that same unsettling grace. Your employment was terminated with severance. Your apartment has been cleared. Your belongings are being held. Cleared? The word came out strangled. That's my life. You had no right. I had every right. His voice remained calm, clinical. The moment you interfered in a matter that didn't concern you, you forfeited your claim to anonymity. Naomi tried to sit up despite the screaming pain, desperate to understand, to fight back against this nightmare. I saved someone. That's not a crime. No, Kang said quietly. You disrupted an execution. There's a difference. The words hung in the air like smoke. Execution, not an attack, not random violence. Execution. The man you saved, he continued, overheard something he wasn't meant to hear. His death was necessary. You made it impossible. He's alive because of me. Naomi's voice shook with fury and fear in equal measure. I'm not apologizing for that. I'm not asking you to. The door opened without a knock, because in this place, Naomi was realizing, no one needed permission. The matriarch entered slowly, leaning on an ornate cane, dressed now in a silk robe that probably cost more than Naomi's entire wardrobe. 2 guards flanked her, but stayed at the threshold as she moved to the bedside. Up close, she was smaller than Naomi remembered. Delicate, almost fragile-looking, but her eyes held the weight of decades, sharp and assessing. You acted without thinking, the old woman said softly in accented English. That kind of instinct is rare. I didn't do it for you, Naomi said, meeting her gaze despite every survival instinct screaming at her to look away. Or for him. I did it because watching someone die when you can stop it, that's not something I can live with. Something flickered across the matriarch's face. Not quite approval, more like recognition. That, she said, settling carefully into the chair Kang had vacated, is precisely why you're here. I want to go home. You can't. The words were gentle, but absolute. The old woman folded her hands over the head of her cane, studying Naomi like a jeweler examining a stone. The people who ordered that knife will not stop because you interfered. They will look for leverage. Family. Friends. Anyone connected to you becomes a tool to use against us. I don't know anything, Naomi protested. I'm nobody. You were nobody, Kang interjected from the shadows. You became somebody the moment 500 witnesses saw you throw yourself in front of a target under my mother's protection. The room felt like it was shrinking. So what? You're going to keep me prisoner? We're going to keep you alive, the matriarch corrected. There is a difference, child. I didn't ask for this. No one does. The old woman's expression softened fractionally. But you created a debt when you saved that man. In my world, debts must be repaid. You owe us your discretion. We owe you your life. I don't want to owe you anything. Then you should have stayed behind your serving tray. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. Naomi had chosen this, maybe not consciously, maybe not understanding the cost, but she'd chosen it the second she moved. The matriarch rose slowly, signaling the conversation's end. At the door, she paused, glancing back with eyes that held something almost like sympathy. You are safe here, Naomi Carter, she said quietly. But you are not free. The door closed with a whisper of finality, leaving Naomi alone in her gilded cage, watching Seoul's lights glitter below like a city full of people whose lives hadn't irrevocably changed in the space of a heartbeat. People who were still invisible, still safe, still free. The truth came 3 days later, delivered with tea and devastation. Naomi had spent those days in restless captivity, her wound healing, her mind racing, her demands for release met with polite deflection by staff who spoke minimal English and maximum evasion. She'd been given clothes that fit too well, meals she couldn't taste, and a view of a city she couldn't reach. When Kang finally entered her room again, he wasn't alone. The matriarch settled into the chair by the window with the deliberate movements of someone rationing energy. Kang remained standing, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier awaiting orders. "Tell me about the man I saved," Naomi said before either could speak. She'd had 3 days to prepare for this conversation. "His name, what he did, why someone wanted him dead." "His name doesn't matter," Kang replied. "What matters is what he heard." "Then tell me what he heard." The matriarch's fingers tapped once against her cane. Permission granted. "He wasn't a stable attendant," Kang said. "He was a cleaner, low-level, invisible, the kind of person powerful men forget exists while they talk." His jaw tightened. "He overheard a deal. Names, numbers. Enough to damage 3 families and expose a trafficking route we've spent 5 years trying to shut down." Naomi's chest constricted. "So you were going to kill him? For hearing something?" "We weren't going to do anything." The matriarch's voice remained soft, but something harder edged beneath it. "Our rivals wanted him dead. Publicly. At my son's event. A message that no one, not even witnesses under our protection, could survive their reach." "The knife was theater," Kang continued. "An execution disguised as an attack on my mother. It would have looked like collateral damage. Tragic. Unavoidable." Naomi felt sick. "But You saved him," the old woman finished. "In front of 500 people. You made it impossible to claim accident. You made it a failure." The room spun, though Naomi was sitting perfectly still. "I didn't know." "That's why you're here." Kang moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "If you'd known, if you'd understood what you were disrupting, you might have hesitated. But you didn't. You just moved. And now everyone saw it," Naomi whispered, understanding crystallizing like ice in her veins. "Now everyone saw a Black American waitress throw herself between a marked man and death," the matriarch confirmed. "You became interesting, unpredictable, a variable that other families will want to understand. Or eliminate," Kang added with brutal honesty. Naomi's hands clenched in the silk sheets. "I didn't agree to any of this. I don't want to be part of your world." "You think survival is about agreement?" Kang turned from the window, and for the first time, she saw something other than control in his expression. Frustration. Maybe even understanding. "You think morality gives you immunity? You saved a man's life. That was admirable. It was also catastrophically naive." "So what?" Anger spiked through her fear. "I should have let him die? Stood there and watched?" "Yes," Kang said simply. "If you wanted to stay invisible. If you wanted to go back to your apartment and your job and your ordinary life." "Yes." The word hung between them like an accusation. "The man you saved is in a safe house," the matriarch said, her tone gentling fractionally. "Somewhere remote, protected. He'll live because of you." "And me?" Silence. "You're too visible to hide," Kang said finally. "Too interesting to ignore. Putting you in a safe house would be like putting a spotlight on it." "So I'm bait." The realization tasted like copper. "You're leverage we can't afford to lose," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Naomi's voice cracked. "You're keeping me here, in plain sight, while whoever wanted that man dead figures out how to use me against you. I'm not protected. I'm exposed." The matriarch rose slowly, her expression unreadable. You saved one life, child. Now we must ensure it doesn't cost us yours. Or cost you your reputation, Naomi shot back. In my world, the old woman said quietly, those are the same thing. She moved toward the door, then paused. My son will explain your options tomorrow, what little of them remain. When they left, Naomi was alone again with her view of Seoul and a truth she couldn't unknow. She hadn't saved an innocent man from random violence. She'd saved a marked witness from a planned execution. She'd disrupted a message meant to keep an entire criminal ecosystem in balance. And now, somewhere in that glittering city below, someone was deciding whether she was more useful alive or dead. The man she'd saved was hidden away, protected, invisible again. But Naomi? Naomi was a problem everyone could see. The dress arrived at dawn with no explanation. Just silk, the color of midnight, elegant and severe, laid across her bed like a verdict. You're expected downstairs in 1 hour, the attendant said in careful English. A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and hands that had clearly dressed far more cooperative people. The guests have been recalled? Naomi's stomach dropped. What guests? But the woman was already gone, leaving only the dress and a pair of heels that probably cost more than Naomi's last 3 paychecks combined. She thought about refusing, thought about barricading the door and demanding answers. But the memory of Kang's clinical assessment, "You're too visible to hide," kept echoing in her skull. Visibility wasn't protection. It was strategy. The Grand Lotta's ballroom looked exactly as it had the night of the attack, if you didn't know where to look for the bloodstains. The marble had been polished to mirror brightness. Fresh flowers cascaded from crystal vases. The string quartet played something soft and forgettable, filling the space with the illusion of normalcy. But the guests knew. Naomi could feel it the moment she entered on Kang's arm. Not his hand, just his presence beside her like a declaration. Conversations didn't stop, but they shifted. Eyes tracked her movement with the precision of predators assessing new territory. She was no longer wearing a server's uniform. That changed everything. The silk dress marked her as something else, not staff, not guest, something in between, something dangerous. Keep your chin up, Kang murmured, so quietly only she could hear. Show fear, and they'll devour you. I'm terrified, she whispered back. Good. That means you're paying attention. He guided her to the center of the room, the exact spot where she'd hit the floor bleeding 4 days ago, and the quartet fell silent on some invisible cue. Every eye in the ballroom fixed on them. Kang didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. 4 nights ago, an attempt was made on a life under my family's protection. His English was perfect, deliberate, designed to ensure no one could claim misunderstanding. This woman, Naomi Carter, acted to prevent it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Naomi felt them like physical touches, curious, calculating, contemptuous. She acted, Kang continued, his hand moving to rest lightly on Naomi's shoulder. Under my authority. The lie landed like a stone in water. Shock registered on faces that had spent decades perfecting neutrality. Someone dropped a glass. The sound of crystal shattering echoed in the silence. She is no longer employed by this hotel, Kang said. She is under my personal protection. Any action taken against her, any harm, any threat, any inconvenience, will be considered an act of aggression against my family. His fingers tightened fractionally on Naomi's shoulder. Warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell. She is untouchable. The word hung in the air like a blade. Naomi forced herself to meet the eyes watching her. Men in suits worth more than cars. women dripping in diamonds and disdain, faces she'd served champagne to without ever being truly seen. They saw her now, a black woman in borrowed silk, standing beside one of Seoul's most dangerous men, being claimed as his responsibility in front of everyone who mattered. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to tell them all this was a mistake, that she'd just been trying to help, that she didn't want any of this. But Kang's hand remained steady on her shoulder, and his mother watched from her seat with eyes that promised consequences Naomi couldn't begin to imagine. So she stayed silent, stayed still, played the role she hadn't auditioned for. "Enjoy the evening," Kang said, his tone making it clear the announcement was over. The quartet resumed. Conversations restarted with forced casualness. But nothing was casual about the calculations happening behind carefully neutral expressions. Naomi had become a symbol of Kang's power, of his family's reach, of their willingness to claim anything they wanted and dare anyone to object. She'd also become a target for anyone who wanted to test that claim. Later, when Kang finally allowed her to leave the ballroom's suffocating attention, she turned on him in the empty hallway. "You told them I acted under your authority," she said, voice shaking with fury. I didn't even know who you were." "I know. So why lie?" "Because the truth would have made you expendable," Kang said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "This way, you're mine, and what's mine, no one touches." "I'm not yours," Naomi said through gritted teeth. "As of tonight?" He adjusted his cufflinks with casual precision. "Yes, you are." He started walking away, then paused. "You wanted to save a life," he said without turning. "Congratulations. You saved his. Now let me save yours." Naomi stood alone in the hallway, dressed in silk that felt like chains, protected by a declaration that felt like ownership, untouchable, trapped, visible to everyone and free to no one. The price of heroism, she was learning, wasn't death. It was becoming someone else's property. The first lesson came at 6 a.m. with tea Naomi hadn't asked for, and a woman who introduced herself only as Mrs. Lim. "You will learn to walk properly," she said in clipped English, gesturing to Naomi's bare feet. "To sit, to pour tea. To be silent when silence is required." Naomi, still half asleep and furious about it, stared at her. "I know how to walk." "You know how to move through a room unnoticed," Mrs. Lim corrected. "Now you must learn to move through one while everyone is watching." It was, Naomi realized with sinking dread, going to be a very long day. The routine became a kind of torture. Mornings, posture training, tea ceremony, the specific angle of a bow that conveyed respect without submission. Afternoons, language lessons, basic Korean phrases delivered with the expectation of perfection. Evenings, observation, watching recordings of formal dinners and business meetings, learning to read the silences between words. "Why?" Naomi finally demanded on day 3, when Mrs. Lim corrected her tea-pouring angle for the 100th time. "Why does any of this matter?" "Because you are no longer invisible," Mrs. Lim said simply. "And visible people who do not know the rules become liabilities." Everywhere Naomi went, shadows followed. Guards in the hallways, cameras in the corners, staff who appeared the moment she left her room, offering assistance she didn't want and surveillance she couldn't refuse. She tested it once, walked to the building's exit just to see what would happen. A guard materialized before she reached the elevator. Polite, immovable. "Miss Carter, perhaps the garden would be more suitable for a walk?" Translation: "You're not leaving." She went to the garden. 2 more guards flanked the perimeter. The cage was gilded, spacious, beautifully appointed. But it was still a cage. The cultural clashes came daily. Small wars fought over impossible expectations. "Lower your eyes when the matriarch enters," Mrs. Lim instructed. "No. It is a sign of respect." "It's a sign of submission," Naomi corrected. "And I didn't survive this long by teaching people I'll shrink on command." Mrs. Lim's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe approval, before settling back into professional neutrality. "Then you will find life here very difficult." "It's already difficult." "It will become impossible." But Naomi had grown up black in spaces that didn't want her, female in rooms that tried to ignore her, poor in a world that punished poverty like a crime. She knew how to exist in impossible. She just hadn't expected it to follow her to Seoul. The confrontation with Kang happened on day 7, when Naomi's patience finally shattered. She found him in his office, walked past his assistant's protests, past the guard's warnings, and straight through his door without knocking. "You claimed me," she said, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "In front of everyone. You made me yours without asking." Kang looked up from his paperwork, expression unreadable. "Yes. I didn't consent to that." "You consented the moment you interfered in matters beyond your understanding." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "Did you think saving that man would have no consequences?" "I thought doing the right thing mattered." "It does." He stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace. "It matters so much that you would have died for it. Disappeared. Your body never found. Your family never knowing what happened. That's what doing the right thing earns people in my world." "So you saved me from dying nobly?" Her laugh was bitter. "How generous." "I saved you from dying small," Kang corrected, and something in his voice made her pause. "Forgotten, meaningless. A waitress who made a stupid mistake and paid with anonymity? And now I'm what? Your property? Now you're someone they can't touch without consequences." He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You wanted to matter, Miss Carter? Congratulations. You matter now." "I wanted to save a life. And I'm trying to save yours." They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with mutual defiance and something else. Something neither seemed willing to name. "I won't bow to you," Naomi said finally. "I won't lower my eyes or shrink or pretend to be grateful for this cage you've built around me." Something that might have been respect flickered across Kang's face. "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" "Learn the rules," he said. "Not so you can obey them, so you know which ones to break." The words landed like a key turning in a lock. Naomi studied him, this man who'd claimed her, trapped her, protected her, and saw something she hadn't expected. Strategy. "You want me to survive," she said slowly, "but not by disappearing." "Disappearing didn't work the first time," Kang replied. "So we'll try visibility instead. Controlled. Weaponized." "And if I refuse?" His expression hardened. "Then you die proving a point to people who won't remember your name." He returned to his desk, dismissing her without words. But Naomi didn't leave immediately. She stood in his doorway, watching him work, understanding finally crystallizing. The cage wasn't meant to break her. It was meant to train her. And survival, real survival, meant learning every rule of this world. Not to follow them, but to know exactly which ones to shatter when the time came. The summons came on a silver tray with the morning tea, a handwritten note in elegant script that somehow managed to feel more like a command than an invitation. "Join me, the garden pavilion." Come alone, as if Naomi had a choice, as if she was ever truly alone. The garden pavilion sat at the center of the estate's grounds, all dark wood and paper screens, surrounded by carefully manicured trees that probably cost more than most people's houses. The matriarch waited inside, seated at a low table with a tea service arranged before her with mathematical precision. She didn't look up when Naomi entered, just gestured to the cushion across from her. Sit. Naomi hesitated. Sitting on the floor felt too vulnerable, too submissive. But the old woman's expression brooked no argument. She sat, awkwardly, her healing side protesting. You do not bow, the matriarch observed, pouring tea with practiced grace. Mrs. Lim says you refuse to lower your eyes, that you argue with every instruction. Here it comes, Naomi thought, the punishment for not playing along. Good, the old woman said. Naomi blinked. Good? Obedience is easy to find. The matriarch slid a cup across the table. I have an entire organization full of people who follow orders. What we lack, is unpredictability. She sipped her own tea, studying Naomi over the rim with those sharp, ageless eyes. I am old, she continued. 74 years in this world. For 50 of them, I have been a target. My enemies know how I think, how I respond to threats, how I move my pieces across the board. I'm not a piece, Naomi said quietly. No, the matriarch agreed. You're a disruption. A variable they cannot predict because you do not think like us. You do not calculate cost the way we do. She set down her cup with a soft click. You moved without thinking, without knowing who that man was, what saving him would cost, what consequences would follow. My son's guards would have thought. His advisors would have calculated. They would have stayed frozen while a message was sent. And that's a good thing? Naomi's voice carried an edge. That I didn't let someone die? It is a dangerous thing, the matriarch corrected. Dangerous for you, and potentially dangerous for my enemies. The words settled between them like stones. You see the world in black and white, the old woman continued. Right and wrong, save or let die. That kind of moral clarity is rare in my world. Most people here have spent so long in gray that they forget what conviction looks like. She leaned forward slightly, intensity sharpening her features. That makes you either a liability or an asset. I have not yet decided which. Naomi's pulse hammered. What are you saying? I am saying I want you trained, not as decoration for my son's arm, not as some pretty trophy to prove our generosity. Her gaze never wavered. I want you educated in how this world works, the hierarchies, the histories, the pressure points. Why? Because enemies grow bold when they understand you completely, the matriarch said, and I am tired of being understood. Naomi stared at this small, elegant woman who'd survived 50 years as a target and realized with sudden clarity. This wasn't about kindness. This was strategy. You want to weaponize me, Naomi said. I want to give you the tools to survive. The old woman's expression softened fractionally. What you do with those tools is your choice. But make no mistake, without them, you will not last 6 months in this world. You are too visible, too interesting, and too naive. I never asked for any of this, Naomi said, hearing the desperation creep into her voice. I never asked for power or protection or training. I just wanted to do the right thing. And that, the matriarch replied, is precisely why you might be worth the investment. She poured more tea, the gesture somehow both dismissive and inclusive. No one worthy of power ever asks for it, she continued. They have it thrust upon them by circumstances they didn't choose. The question is not whether you wanted this child. The question is what you will do now that you have it. I don't have power, Naomi protested. I'm a prisoner here. You have my son's protection. You have the attention of every major family in Seoul. You have a story that makes you memorable. The old woman's smile was thin and sharp. That is power, whether you recognize it or not. The only question is whether you will learn to wield it before someone uses it to destroy you. Naomi's hands trembled around her teacup. And if I refuse? If I say no to your training, your education, your entire world? The matriarch's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Then you become a liability we cannot afford, and we deal with liabilities permanently. The threat hung in the air, soft as silk and just as deadly. Or, the old woman continued, you can learn, adapt. Become someone who chooses their own fate rather than having it chosen for them. She stood with careful dignity, signaling the end of the conversation. You have until tomorrow to decide. Power will either change you, Miss Carter, or it will kill you. She paused at the pavilion's entrance, glancing back. I am curious to see which you choose. Then she was gone, leaving Naomi alone with cold tea and an impossible decision. Accept training and become part of a world she never wanted to enter. Or refuse and become a problem that needed solving. Either way, the girl who'd thrown herself in front of a knife to save a stranger was gone. The only question was who she would become in her place. Naomi chose survival, not because she wanted power, but because dying to prove a point seemed like the stupidest possible ending to a story that had already gone so wrong. The training began the next morning. Mrs. Lim was replaced by a rotation of specialists who treated Naomi's education like a military operation. Professor Chen taught negotiation. Listen to what they don't say. The pauses matter more than the words. Mr. Huang taught observation. A man who checks his phone 3 times in 10 minutes is either bored or waiting for permission. Know which. The matriarch herself taught strategic silence. Americans fill every gap with noise. Learn to let silence do the work. People confess to fill the void. Naomi absorbed it all with the desperate focus of someone learning to swim in deep water, because drowning was the only alternative. She learned to read the hierarchy in how people entered a room, to identify alliances by who sat where, to recognize when a question was actually a threat wrapped in politeness. She learned that in this world, everything was a test. And 3 weeks after she'd made her choice, Kang gave her the real one. There's a meeting tonight, he said, appearing in the library where Naomi had been studying territorial disputes between rival families. Suppliers from Busan. They're renegotiating terms. Naomi looked up from her notes. And I won't be there. Her stomach dropped. Why are you telling me this? Because you will be. The book slipped from her fingers. What? Kang's expression remained neutral, but she'd learned to read the micro-tensions in his jaw. He was testing her. Again. You've had 3 weeks of training, he said. Time to see if any of it took. I can't. Panic fluttered in her chest. I don't know enough. I'll embarrass you. You'll represent me, he corrected. There's a difference. Kang. The meeting is at 8. Dress appropriately. Listen more than you speak. And remember. He paused at the doorway. They'll expect you to fail. Prove them wrong. Then he was gone, leaving Naomi with 4 hours to prepare for a test she had no idea how to pass. The conference room was all dark wood and darker intentions. 6 men sat around a table that probably cost more than a car, their expressions ranging from curious to contemptuous when Naomi entered. She wore black, severe, elegant, borrowed armor, and kept her spine straight despite every instinct screaming to run. "Gentlemen," she said in careful Korean, one of the phrases Mrs. Lim had drilled into her. "Thank you for meeting tonight. Where is Chairman Kang?" The question came from the oldest man, his tone sharp with suspicion. "Occupied with other matters," Naomi replied, switching to English. "Let them adjust to her, not the other way around. He has asked me to represent his interests." Silence. Then laughter, low, disbelieving, insulting. "A waitress?" one of them said in Korean, probably assuming she wouldn't understand. "This is an insult." Naomi let the words hang for a beat. 2, 3. Strategic silence. Then she smiled. Cold, controlled, nothing like the terrified woman who'd woken up in this world a month ago. "I was a waitress," she said in flawless Korean. "Thank you, intensive language training. Now I speak for Chairman Kang. If you find that insulting, you're welcome to leave and explain to your superiors why you walked away from a negotiation over your pride." The room froze. The old man's eyes narrowed, reassessing. "You have his authority? Would I be here otherwise?" Another beat of silence. Then he gestured to the empty chair. Permission granted. Naomi sat, keeping her movements deliberate. She pulled out the briefing notes she'd memorized, laid them on the table without opening them. A subtle signal that she didn't need to check her facts. "You're here to renegotiate shipping percentages," she began. "Currently 15% to your organization, 10 to logistics, 5 to security. You want 20. "We deserve 20, one of the younger men interjected. "Our routes, our risk." "Your routes," Naomi agreed, "which we protect, which we legitimize, which we keep clear of law enforcement attention." She leaned forward slightly. "Risk goes both ways, gentlemen. The question is whether your 20% is worth the instability of renegotiating in the middle of an expansion." She watched their faces, reading the tells Professor Chen had taught her. The older man was intrigued. 2 others were calculating. One was angry, but contained. The angry one would be the problem. "What does Chairman Kang offer?" the old man asked. 18%, Naomi said, "with guaranteed protection for your secondary routes and priority access to the new Incheon terminals." She hadn't invented these terms. They'd been in Kang's briefing, but delivering them with confidence, with authority, that was all her. "And if we refuse?" the angry one challenged. Naomi met his gaze without flinching. "Then you refuse, and we find partners who understand that reasonable profit is better than no profit at all." The old man's lips twitched, almost a smile. 18%, he said finally. "But we want contract guarantees in writing." "Of course." Naomi kept her expression neutral even as relief flooded through her. "Mr. Kang's team will have documents ready by Friday." She stood, signaling the meeting's end, a power move Mrs. Lim had taught her. "Gentlemen?" They rose, bowing with varying degrees of respect. The old man lingered as the others filed out. "You are not what I expected," he said in English. "Good," Naomi replied. "Predictability is weakness." His laugh was genuine this time. "The matriarch teaches you well." When she returned to the estate, Kang was waiting in his office. 18%, she said before he could ask. "With protections and terminal access." They accepted. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Maybe pride. "You didn't need me there." "No," Naomi agreed, and realized with sudden clarity. "I didn't." The fear that had defined her first month in this world, that constant, suffocating panic, had transformed into something else. Resolve. Purpose. the understanding that she could exist in this world, not by shrinking or pretending or begging for mercy, but by learning its language and speaking it fluently. She wasn't pretending to belong anymore. She was making them make space for her, and that, Naomi realized, was the most dangerous thing she'd done yet. The first message arrived in a flower arrangement. White chrysanthemums, funeral flowers in Korean culture, delivered to Naomi's room with a card that read simply, "We remember what you disrupted. No signature, no return address. Just a reminder that somewhere out there, people were still angry about the man she'd saved." Naomi brought the flowers to Kang immediately. He studied the card with the clinical detachment of someone reading a weather report, then made a single phone call in rapid Korean. Within an hour, the flowers were gone, and 2 additional guards appeared outside her door. "It's starting," she said. "It never stopped," Kang corrected. "They're just done being subtle." The second message came 3 days later, more direct. A photo slipped under her door while she slept. Grainy surveillance footage of her sister walking to work in Atlanta. No threat written, none needed. "We can reach your family." Naomi's hands shook as she stared at her sister's face, pixelated but unmistakable. LaShawn, who knew nothing about Korean Mafia politics, who thought Naomi was still working at a hotel, who had no idea her life might be in danger because her sister had made one impulsive choice. This time, Naomi didn't go to Kang. She went to the matriarch. "They're escalating," the old woman said, examining the photo with narrowed eyes. "Testing to see if you're a weakness they can exploit." "My sister is already under protection." The matriarch's tone brooked no argument. "We anticipated this. She has 2 of our people watching her. She doesn't know, and she won't. But she's safe." Naomi's breath caught. "You've been protecting her this whole time? Did you think we wouldn't? A hint of something? Amusement? Respect?" flickered across the old woman's face. "We protect what matters to our assets. Your family's safety is part of your training, child. A distracted student learns nothing." The casual ruthlessness of it should have terrified Naomi. Instead, it steadied her. The real test came 5 days later at a reception Kang was hosting for international investors. Legitimate business masking less legitimate negotiations. Naomi had learned to spot the tells. Men who arrived together but pretended not to know each other. Conversations that stopped when staff approached. The weight of phones that stayed silent by choice rather than chance. She was observing from the periphery, still learning to read these rooms, when she noticed him. A man in an expensive suit, Korean, maybe 40, circulating through the crowd with practiced ease. Nothing unusual except the way he tracked Kang's movements, the slight bulge under his jacket that might have been nothing. Might have been a weapon. Naomi's pulse kicked up. She flagged one of Kang's security team with a subtle gesture Mrs. Lim had taught her, index finger tapping twice against her wineglass. The guard materialized beside her. "The man in the gray suit," she murmured in Korean. "Near the bar. He's carrying something." "Are you certain?" "No." Naomi met the guard's skeptical gaze. "But Chairman Kang can't afford for me to be wrong." The guard spoke into his sleeve piece. Within seconds, 2 more security personnel drifted toward the bar with casual precision. The man in gray noticed. His expression didn't change, but his body language shifted. Tension, calculation, the micro-decision between flight and confrontation. He chose flight, tried to anyway. Security intercepted him at the exit, smoothly, quietly, escorting him through a side door before most guests even noticed the disruption. Kang appeared at Naomi's elbow moments later, his presence making her jump. "The man you flagged," he said quietly. Was carrying wire recording equipment. High grade, government issue. Naomi's stomach flipped. Government? Prosecutor's office, trying to build a case. His eyes found hers, unreadable. If he'd gotten recordings of tonight's conversations, it would have compromised 3 deals and exposed connections we've spent years cultivating. I noticed he was watching you differently. The way he moved. You saw what my own security missed. Kang's tone carried something new. Not quite warmth, but recognition. Because you weren't looking for threats. You were reading behavior. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since that night in the ballroom, Naomi saw him truly look at her. Not as a problem or a responsibility, but as something else entirely. You're no longer just under my protection, he said quietly. You're becoming necessary. The word landed with the weight of a commitment. Necessary meant valuable. Valuable meant they couldn't afford to lose her. But it also meant they couldn't afford to let her go. Later that night, after the reception ended and guests departed with their secrets intact, the matriarch summoned both Naomi and Kang to her private study. The people who sent those flowers, she said without preamble, are affiliated with the Lee family. Mid-tier organization, ambitious. Stupid. They're escalating because they think Naomi is vulnerable, Kang said. They're escalating because they think she's a hostage. The matriarch's smile was sharp as a knife. They're wrong. She looked at Naomi with those ancient, calculating eyes. They think by threatening you, they threaten us. They think you're a weakness to exploit. She paused. Show them otherwise. How? Naomi asked. You're learning our world, the old woman said. Now teach them you understand it. The next morning, Naomi made her first independent move. She sent white chrysanthemums to the Lee family's patriarch, with a card that read, I remember what you attempted. Do you remember what happened to the last people who miscalculated? No signature needed. The message was clear. She wasn't a hostage waiting to be rescued. She was a player who'd learned the rules, and somewhere in Seoul, in offices where men made decisions about life and death over tea and spreadsheets, people began to realize they hadn't created a problem. They'd created something far more dangerous. An outsider who understood their world well enough to use it against them. 6 weeks after a champagne flute slipped from her fingers, Naomi Carter stood on the balcony of Kang's estate and barely recognized the woman reflected in the glass. She wore confidence like tailored silk, stood with the posture of someone who'd learned that taking up space wasn't theft. It was survival. Her eyes carried the weight of lessons learned in blood and silence, and the dangerous clarity that came from understanding exactly how fragile safety had always been. The girl who'd apologized for bleeding on expensive floors was gone. Naomi wasn't entirely sure what had replaced her. Second thoughts? She didn't turn at Kang's voice. They'd developed a rhythm over the weeks, circling each other like planets in careful orbit, close enough to feel the pull, distant enough to maintain their own gravity. Just thoughts, she replied, about who I was, who I'm becoming. He joined her at the railing, maintaining that precise distance that somehow felt more intimate than touching. Regrets? He asked. Would it matter if I had them? No, Kang admitted, but I'm curious anyway. Naomi considered the question honestly. Did she regret throwing herself in front of that knife? Disrupting an execution she didn't understand? Saving a man whose name she still didn't know? I regret not having a choice, she said finally, But I don't regret the choice I made. There's a difference. There's always a difference. She glanced at him. You taught me that. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe respect. You've learned quickly. I had excellent motivation. Learn or die makes for an efficient curriculum. His laugh was brief, but genuine. The Naomi who woke up in my home 6 weeks ago would never have sent funeral flowers to a rival family patriarch. The Naomi from 6 weeks ago thought the world made sense, she countered. That doing the right thing meant something. That heroism was rewarded instead of weaponized. And now? Now I know the world never made sense. I was just privileged enough not to notice. Naomi turned to face him fully. You claimed me in that ballroom. Told everyone I acted under your authority? Yes. I hated you for it. I know. I don't anymore. The admission felt dangerous. Not because I'm grateful, but because I understand. You didn't save me from death. You saved me from irrelevance. Kang's eyes searched hers. And that's better? That's real, Naomi said. Better is what I make of it. They stood in silence, the city glittering below like a battlefield made of light. You could still leave, Kang said quietly. Disappear, we could arrange it. New identity, new country, your family protected from a distance. It wasn't the first time he'd offered. It wouldn't be the last. No, Naomi said. Why not? Because running means they win. She felt the truth of it settle in her bones. Because I didn't survive this long just to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Because... She paused, finding the words. Because for the first time in my life, people see me. Really see me. Not a waitress, not invisible. Me. Even if what they see is dangerous? Especially then. Kang's smile was small but real. You're not what I expected. Good, Naomi echoed the matriarch's words. Predictability is weakness. He moved toward the door, then paused. There's a meeting tomorrow. Chinese delegation. High stakes. You want me there. I need you there, he corrected. Not because you're mine, but because you see what others miss. After he left, Naomi remained on the balcony, feeling the weight of transformation. She'd come to Seoul to work, to send money home, to be invisible enough to survive, and visible enough to matter to the people who loved her. Instead, she'd become someone else entirely, not a victim, not a hostage, not even really protected, an asset, a variable, a woman who'd learned the rules of a world that wanted her dead and decided to play anyway. The next evening, Naomi walked into the conference room where Chinese delegates waited with the calculated patience of apex predators. She wore black. No jewelry. Hair pulled back with severe elegance. The room fell silent when she entered. Not because she was Kang's, not because she was American or black or unexpected, though she was all those things, but because in 6 weeks she'd learned something more valuable than any of the matriarch's lessons. Visibility wasn't a liability if you controlled the narrative. Being seen wasn't dangerous if you made them look on your terms. Gentlemen, she said in Mandarin, another language she'd absorbed like her life depended on it, because it did. Thank you for your patience. She sat at the table like she'd been born to it, like she belonged, like she'd earned her place through blood and instinct, and the kind of stubborn survival that couldn't be taught, only tested. Kang entered moments later, but Naomi had already begun the negotiation. He took his seat and let her lead, a silent acknowledgement that she'd stopped being something he protected. She'd become someone he trusted. Across the city, in rooms where decisions were made over tea and violence, people spoke her name with careful respect. the black woman who'd disrupted an execution, who'd learned their language, their rules, their games, who'd been given a cage and transformed it into a kingdom. The matriarch listened to these reports with a satisfaction she rarely showed. Her son had claimed a hostage. She had created a weapon, and Naomi had become something neither of them expected. Someone who chose her own fate in a world built on taking choices away. She had stepped in front of a knife to save a stranger, and walked out as someone no one dared ignore. Thanks so much, my dear friends, for enjoying this beautiful story till this end. If you've not subscribed, kindly subscribe now to be notified when we drop our next story. Also, like the video and comment where you are watching from and what time it's at your end. Thank you.